Okay. Thank you all for tuning in to listen to this lecture. The images that I'm using are either public domain or from a VecTeezy license. I use a lot of AI images simply because for this particular film we're going to discuss, I could not find a lot of images on a site that I use called Pickrel that I have a paid membership to. So I use some VecTeezy images to convey the times. So you'll see that a lot. Okay. If you're not understanding the toll of the sea, this is one version of the character Madame Butterfly that was created. That was first a book in the late 1800s and then evolved into a stage play and then subsequently Hollywood films. And to this day, Madame Butterfly still is culturally relevant. Now on November 18th, I told you that this was going to be a part 3 series, and this is part 2 of Madame Butterfly and Olivia Blanchard Cary. This character is a derivative of Madame Butterfly. And despite the stereotypes, if you go look at the November 18th presentation and lecture that I gave, it seems that there was no shortage of Asian women of different backgrounds and Asian ethnicities lining up to play this part despite the negative implications of it. This is a silent film believed to be the first film that was in Technicolor. Now, this being a film from 1922, it's now 2024, so it's over 100 years. So I think anything before the 70s is in the public domain. So I am encouraging you all to go on YouTube as I had and find this as a result because I don't have a lot of photos from this film. So as a result, it has entered into the public domain. Again, as with all my lectures, you're going to hear page turning. Okay, so if you don't understand who Madame Butterfly is, I would advise you to go back 4 days prior on November 18th and watch that presentation before you get into part 2. This part 2 is going to center solely on Madame Butterfly, which is a derivative of that original Japanese created character. All right, without further ado, we're going to get started. The protagonist is Lotus Flower, played by actress Anna May Wong. So to give you a little background about her, she was born Wong Lusong in Los Angeles, California on January 3rd, 1905. Ironically, she was born in Los Angeles on Flower Street. She knew that she'd become an actress at the age of 11. When the film industry had become relevant in Los Angeles, because of course it didn't originally start there, she would often skip school and use her lunch money to go and see films. Her father didn't approve of her choice of skipping school and using her lunch money for films, but she did it anyway. While in high school, she was working at a department store when she was cast as an extra in the 1919 film Red Lantern. Due to her father's disapproval, Wong participated behind his back. Her interest quickly grew and she dropped out of high school to become an actress. At the age of 17, Wong landed the role of Lotus Flower in The Toll of the Sea. So to revisit the presentation, as I've said, to make sense of the derivatives of Madame Butterfly, I encourage you to go back and watch that series I put out 4 days prior so that you can get a breakdown of old newspaper clippings and things concerning Madame Butterfly. The name Lotus Flower, because in this film they make the character Chinese and give it a different name. Instead of Madame Butterfly, but it's the same difference. So we know a lotus flower means resilience, strength, and beauty, amongst other beliefs. And of course, you can read the screen to see the other meanings. So without further ado, let's get into the film itself. The plot begins with the opening by speaking of China in a sort of fairy tale-ish way, whose seas has a siren that gives gifts. According to the legend, there is a price to be paid for the gifts given by the sea. I haven't found the meaning behind this, and if anybody would like to explain, let me know. This seems to indicate that those seeking fortune should look to the seas as a source of wealth. Lotus flower runs for the cliffs in haste as if she's looking for something. Then she finds the man floating in the waters, and he's seemingly passed out. The film doesn't explain where this man, the character Alan Carver, which is played by Kenneth Harlan, who is her so-called love match, doesn't say how he ended up in that swell. She quickly asked the gentleman, there are some men who were fishermen with assistance with the man. They revive him, of course, and he's taken away. And as she's going to go make haste to find out where he's gone, she's snatched by an elder gentleman, seemingly warns her of entanglements with the man that is a quote-unquote gift from the sea. She is warned to be wary of the stranger since the sea is treacherous. He remembers and then of course he remembers the face of the woman later on, which is Mr. Alan Carver, that heard his cries, and finds out that her name is Lotus Flower. They begin to bond. He's already promising to take her back to America, and she's flattered. So this romance between this Chinese lady, Lotus Flower, and this American man, Alan Carver, moved pretty swiftly. On this slide, the quote on the screen is significant. Because this romance moved as fast as she would like it to, she's already associating America with wealth and a better life. And at the start of this romance, of course, he's saying he is going to take her to the United States. Okay. She insists that she is going to America. Now, the two gossips show up. Of course, these are the ladies you'll see throughout the film if you go watch it. It's 58 minutes long. I encourage you to watch it. And when they approach her, she gets haughty and states that she only wants to speak in the American language as the future wife of an honorable gentleman from that country. By American language, she means English, of course. Next, we're discussing something called marriage in Chinese fashion. I haven't been able to find information on this from what I gathered. This is when Western men married Eastern women, or took the pretense of marrying them in their foreign lands, and then would go back home, often not taking these women and never contacting them again. If you all can find some information on that, please let me know. Then he proceeds to go to a coffee shop and meet with two guys that are seemingly his friends. He's gotten a summons to go back home to his parents, and there's a telegraph, of course, because back then that was the quickest way to communicate. Okay. He's sitting with his friends, saying that he loved Lotus Flower and wants to take her home, while the men are telling him that that is not a good idea, and this slide is very telling. Okay. It's obvious when he points out the difference with the women. You see the white woman who is dressed in Western fashion, and they may be implying in the film that she is soft and beautiful and all of this and have refinement, whereas the Chinese woman that they point to that is sipping her tea alone is the lesser. And that's them giving him a side by side comparison of what he would and wouldn't be dealing with in the United States. Suddenly, Alan Carver, who was in love with Lotus Flower, appears conflicted. After meeting with his friends, he visits her with the news that he has to travel back to San Francisco, where his family resides. She's happy and immediately pulls out her Western attire that she'd accumulated over a long period of time. It also states in the film that she inherited a fashion book from her grandmother of Western fashion. Now, because the grandmother herself was into Western fashion, this could have been an indication that she had been groomed for a long period of time to have a fascination for the West. She even dons Western attire to demonstrate that she is ready to assimilate into Western ideals. She's excited and dancing around and romanticizing the American life and what it's going to be about. Until Mr. Carver states that he can't take her to the United States but vows to return. You get the gist out of this that the conversation indicates that they may have already gotten married. But you'll have to watch the film and then we'll keep with this commentary. And so she's heartbroken after bragging to the gossips about her latest adventure. So of course, Alan Carver goes back to the United States, marries a woman of his race, and forgets about Lotus Flower. In the meantime, she lies and keeps up appearances. This is when we see that she has given birth to a son. Next, we have a dollhouse. This is when Lotus Flower, wanting her son to be prepared when his father eventually returns, because she's confident that he was. So in some form or fashion, she's cosplaying what it's like to be the wife of an American and how to live the American way. So the house you see is the architecture of the time in the United States and not her own home. If you go watch the film The Toll of the Sea, you would deduce that Lotus Flower came from money and lived in an affluent house with lots of things, but that just didn't seem to be enough for her. The dollhouse was a way to instill Western culture into her son. And weirdly enough, the same day she learns that Alan Carver, unlike her 4 previous American husbands, because he's not the first American, a euphemism for white American male, isn't the first man she tried to marry and leave mainland China. She gets excited, busies her home getting ready, including getting her son bathed in a fashion to be ready to be presented to his father. Of course, Alan Carver has returned, but he's returned with his new wife. And she has learned about Lotus Flower since she came to China with her husband. Of course, the wife feels that Lotus Flower should know the truth. In a symbolic move in the film, you'll see that Alan and his wife are seated in the exact tea shop where he was told by the 2 men previously to not take Lotus Flower home. A symbol that he brought back the right type of woman with the right type of pedigree to show off as his wife. That's some crazy symbology, but of her 5 husbands, The first four never returned, and this one returns with a wife. Mr. and Miss Carver arrive at Lotus Flowers' home. She's happy to see her husband, initially thinking he had finally come back and she's ready to see him, until she sees the woman wandering her garden, because of course in the film Lotus Flower has the most beautiful garden. And then the truth comes out, and Alan has to tell her that he has married someone else. This next one is like a sad one. The false acceptance. So then we see Lotus Flower trying to keep up a brave face by putting up an act. While doing so, she forgot that hers and Alan Carver's son, that he had no clue he had yet, was in the house getting prepared to be presented to him. Accepting her defeat, she offers them both tea in her garden, and they accept. When she finally spots her son, she realizes that she forgot to mention him and had forgotten all about it, being so excited to see her quote-unquote husband, only to be disappointed that she was dejected when he showed up with his wife. Because of course in the United States, the marriage between Alan Carver and his wife would have been the recognized marriage, not the marriage on mainland China, of course. And of course, to cover her pain, she initially lies and states that her son is from an American family next door, and she even offers him treats to downplay the fact that he's looking directly at his actual father, because it was so embarrassing. So the little boy accepts the treats and run off, and they resume their tea service. Soon after, the wife, I believe the name was Elsie, returns to Lotus Flower to speak with her alone. Of course, this one gives the illusion that women understood another, what's called woman's intuition, and that Elsie just had a weird feeling, likely about little Alan Jr. And so she just wants to know more. Or if you go see the film, you could see probably where she may wanted some curiosity about Lotus Flower still. But however it happened, she returned to the home. And this is when Lotus Flower tells Elsie the truth, that the child is indeed Alan's son. Lotus Flower proceeds to tell Elsie to take Alan Jr. with them to go live in the United States. And this is the saddest part of the film, because the little boy is reluctant to go, and Lotus Flower, holding her son, says, "I am nothing but, I guess, the wet nurse. You all can go and watch it." She acted as if she was his wet nurse or Chinese nurse, but the little boy wasn't falling for it. And eventually the child reluctantly goes with Elsie, as if Elsie had always been his mother. At the end of the film, we can deduce that Alan Carver, his wife, and the little boy have sailed back to the United States. It is also assumed at the end of the film, as in all of the Madame Butterflies, because you'll see this commonality in Madame Butterfly, where once the child is raised by the white couple, despite the fact that the child is half Chinese, that an unaliving occurs. In this film, the way that they wrote Lotus Flower, who is a derivative of Madame Butterfly, we deduce that she jumped in the sea and allowed the sirens, or the sea that gave her the gift of Alan Carver, to permanently wash her away. I encourage you all to go and watch The Toll of the Sea. It's 58 minutes. It's a great film. I talked through it pretty fast, and I didn't have a lot of footage from the film itself, and again made most use of either Pickrell, who I have get to sign into, or Vecteezy AI images. Lotus Flower in the film, if you go watch it, you'll notice that she lives in a beautiful house, very ornate carvings. You don't see parents around, but you see servants. She had a beautiful garden, a home down by the sea near fishermen, where she had no want for anything. She seemed to wear fine silks and have a great life. But despite that, she would much rather have chased a dream in a land that she knew nothing about and was willing to unalive herself. After her 5th attempt to get an American, again, American being euphemism for white husband, and sacrificed being a mother and sacrificed herself to the sea, after it is deduced that her son was taken away. This is important because in real life, women just would only sacrifice their child when they know their child is in danger. So the archetype of Madame Butterfly taught what I think is a very, very dangerous lesson on how women handled themselves in motherhood. And people actually thought that this created character was poetic. She is so saddened and filled with unrequited love for the man who returned with his wife, and him and the wife took her son, that she threw herself to the sea. It's as if she overly invested in something that you would think she would reasonably know, but was not really going to ever be successful. It's as if she didn't learn from the first 4 husbands. But here's my 3 takeaways, okay? From this. Number 1, the Blumenbach connection to this. As a Chinese woman from mainland China, Lotus Flower would not have been accepted in society as Alan Carver's wife in the United States. And that is a fact given the racial stratification and anti-Chinese sentiment at the time. Particularly, this story makes it known that the characters are in San Francisco, where there was a huge amount of anti-Chinese sentiment at that time, the way in which they presented this film Toll of the Sea. So Blumenbachish wise, you could not have the Caucasian, what they called it, take the Mongolian home. Again, this is their terminology. Go back to my videos on October 31st and November 1st discussing this and getting down to Blumenbach, okay? My most recent video of Blumenbach. The second of the 3 things are the social implications. In taking her own life, Lotus Flower appeared to accept the inferiority assigned to her given her race and status as a single mother. When she entered that marriage on mainland China, in her view, that was a legitimate marriage. And while it was not legitimate to him, because you have to understand that Victorian type of values in society, you just didn't give birth to a child to a man who you were not married to, okay? So Lotus Flower ruined it for herself a long time ago, because she'd already gone through 4 previous husbands, according to the film, before we got to this 5th one. And it segues to the final thing, propaganda. I believe that this was a sort of hypersexualization of Asian women in those lands as they finally got China and Japan to open up as the exoticized other. Because around this time we were finally the Philippines was finally being looked at by the United States as well. And the problem is these kinds of rifts ultimately came to hurt relationships between Asian men and Asian women. This is the propaganda. This is the beautiful, foreign, exotic woman who would throw herself at the altar of wanting a white man so bad that she will take her own life and allow a white child, her child, to be raised in a white world by a white woman who isn't the biological mother. This is sent a negative message. Again, for years, Madame Butterfly just didn't sit right with me, and I just didn't understand it until I watched this film, until I finally started to research it this year for the first time for this series. This isn't something I'm going to revisit too much, because the ideal of unaliving yourself because you can't fit into someone else's culture and there's an inferiority in your own, to me, is quite frankly a negative message. But that's just me. Some people still see this as art and not as propaganda for a woman to denigrate not wanting to marry of her own at the time, and also at the same time implying that if she is unalived and her child is raised in a foreign land, in a culture that is only half of who he is, he'd be better raised in that culture instead of around the other half, which gave him nurture up to that point. All right, I encourage y'all to go watch The Toll of the Sea. If you want, go see some more of Madame Butterfly played by different actresses, and go back to the November 18th presentation. Sorry I couldn't get more clips of the film itself. I could not find any. If anybody's good at finding film clips, let me know in the future. All right. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a good day.